Hey, it's time again from Cracked Rabbit Gaming, and this is it. It's time to make some autotiles. This is part 3 of my autotile guide. And so, here's this diagram that I made based off of the color-coded autotile I showed in the first video. And I just put this graphic together, so you can download this from my site, and you can download the actual autotile itself if you want to try it out. And this has a little bit more. It shows the grid and counters and stuff, just for reference. And I'm just gonna show this from time to time for reference as to what we're doing. And then I opened up our inside A2 file. I recommend you do this just so you have just a background guide to use, even though you should remember how many squares everything takes up, but it's easy to just have this open and draw on top of some of these, just as a reminder. And then I used this plugin called Guide, and that sets up actual guides rather than a grid, and I have this set to 32 pixels. But we also need a 16 pixel grid, so I'm also turning on my 16 pixel grid here in blue, in the darker blue. You can, if you don't have Guide installed, or if you're using GIMP or whatever, you can just go and set up your grid here and just set it to 16 pixels. I don't know what it is in GIMP, but you can Google that if you're using GIMP, and just put one subdivision on, so then it's just every 16 pixels has a line, and have that turned on. And so the nice thing with using both is that now I have the light blue lines to show me where the 32 pixel grid is, and then I have the dark blue lines. If I zoom in more, it might be easier to see. So I just kind of have different colors for each one, but if you just have the single grid on, that should be fine, especially if you have the background image going. So you should know how to make a regular 32 pixel tile. If you don't, watch part 2 of the video, or you can just use one of the existing tiles that they use either here, or if you go to the A5 tiles, these are just regular tiles that are not auto tiles. So you can just copy one of these to use, just for, if you're following along at home. So I'll just grab one of these, and as you can see, I already deleted some of this stuff in the background, and I just did that with a mask. You can just delete it with the Marquee Tool, just select it and delete it, or whatever you want to do. And I'm going to make, as I mentioned before, the left half of the A2 tiles do not support transparency, as you can see, but the right half does, as you can also see. Like, they have these holes and things. So I'm going to make some on the right side just so you can see how that works. And so I'm just going to grab this pattern here. So I'm going to do a few different ones of these, and the first one I'm going to do, I'm just going to keep it really simple so you can follow along at home. I'm not going to use like a lot of advanced techniques, which I normally would do. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it, and that should give me that whole thing. Just make sure you're really in the lines and you have the whole thing selected. And so I'm just going to drag this up here. Remember, I'm going to the right side of this. And so I'm just going to drag this up here, and then I'm going to zoom in, change over to the whatever this is called, Move Tool, and then I'm just going to use the arrow keys to make sure it's really right up in the corner and it's perfectly aligned, because of course that's important. And so now if we just exported this as it is, it would tile correctly, and it would just, it would make no sense as an auto tile because it's just the same texture over and over again, but it would work, which is good to know. And so I'm just going to make this kind of like a rounded path, so when you draw it out, it'll have rounded corners and stuff, and we can draw it over some other tile, and it'll have transparency, so it'll show through whatever's underneath. And so the first thing you want to do, remember if we go back to this, so the thumbnail is in the upper left, and that's actually where we're going to start, even though the thumbnail's not that important or whatever. You'd think like, well, you want to just make the tile first, and then once you're finished with that, then we'll grab the thumbnail from that. But because the first thing we want to do is make sure the single square up here looks right, and that's the four corners, and that's what we're going to start with. So it just makes sense to make the thumbnail, because that's usually what the thumbnail is. It's the four corners all together, just the one single square. So I have this layer here. I know I have a lot of layers here because I've been messing around practicing, but ignore those, and I'll just say that this is the background tile or whatever. And I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to use the pencil tool just because that's a lot easier to like line up the edges and stuff. If I'm using like the brush tool, that gives you like a really feathered edge, which will actually look better, and that's probably what you're going to want to use. But just to do it quickly, it would take a lot longer to use the brush tool and like really match up all the feathered edges and stuff. So I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to pick a really bright color just so you can see that it's all working right. And another thing, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. Another thing I'm going to do is make this like a weird shape, because if I just made like a perfect circle, that would maybe be like a little easy to do. So I'm going to just kind of make like let's try that. So we've got one that's like really high up, so we want to look at where the seams are going to be, where this is going to be split. And so it's going to be split on this grid. And so I just want to show you that this technique works even for weird shapes. So I've got this one line that's like really high up. This one's kind of in the middle. Maybe I'll actually like change this and move this down, and I'll just like erase this just so we have like a really strange shape. So we've got two that are kind of in the middle, and one's high and one's like really towards the center. So that's good. And sure, I'll do like a blue color too, just to, okay. So there we go. So that's what it's going to be, and then we're going to have this, the background is going to be cut out. So, and I can name this thumbnail. So I could cut the background out now. I'll just wait to do that. And so first things, so now we have the thumbnail, except I haven't cut out the background. But aside from that, it's fine. And actually, I'll add like a little bit more red. So now what we want to do is we're going to duplicate this thumbnail, because we want to use this as the corners too. And normally I'm filming this at a lower resolution, and so normally I have a lot more space to work here. So this is a little weird, but and then I'll rename this. So I hit Control J to duplicate this. You can also drag the layer down onto the new layer button, and it should duplicate it. So I'm going to grab the Marquee Tool, and so I'm using like some minor Photoshop techniques, but nothing too advanced. So I'm going to use the Marquee Tool to select this, this corner along these edges, and of course make sure you're right on the lines. And you could cut this out with Control X and then paste it if you want a new layer for each one. I don't need to do that, so I'm just going to hold down Control and just drag it, and that way it's going to cut it out, but it's going to keep it on the same layer. And so these are just the four corners, so that's what I want to do. And I can grab the marquee from like really far out, as long as it's just these are the only lines we need to make sure it's lining up with. And of course I just dragged this out from here, and in fact I can turn off the thumbnail so you can see that I'm getting rid of this. So now I'm cutting this out and putting it here, and now I'm just making sure that these lines are lined up. Sometimes it looks a little weird depending on what percentage of zoom you are, magnification. And so now I can just go like this, and I can be really sloppy with it since there's nothing else, up here and over here. So now I'm getting a little cramped on space, so I want to make sure I'm zoomed out here. So I'm going to drag this down here, and then I still have to select this one since it's all on the same layer, and then just move this down here and make sure that's all good. So I can deselect that now. So now we have our four corners, and so now if I exported this and I just drew a single square, that would line up. And now I'm going to make a new layer because now we want to do the walls. If we look back at this diagram, so now we want to do these red parts with the white arrows because that's going to be like this path here if you just do a single path or whatever. Or if you just do a giant box, this is going to be the walls that are repeating around and around. And so now I'm going to do this, and actually if we look at the diagram again, so these arrows are going to tile with themselves. So like say this top one, it has to tile on the left and the right, and then it also has to tile with the corners. And so if I just draw it up to the corners, then of course those will tile correctly. That's what I'm going to do, is draw it right up to the corners. And it should pretty much tile with itself as long as it does blend into these corners. If I, for some, basically it should. So what I could do is I could move this layer down, and I'll just name this walls. And now I could just draw this, and I'll go back to my pencil. So I put this below the corners, so now I can, like if I was just kind of sloppy like this and drew all the way up here, then if I overlapped it, the paint or whatever that I just put down would go under the corners, so it wouldn't cover up this blue. So I can be a little bit sloppier, but as you might have noticed, like if I was really sloppy, I've actually changed this corner piece, because even though I'm below it, I can still come out outside of what I've drawn. So that's not good. And so I'm just going to undo all those. So one other trick you can do here is you can take the Marquee Tool and you can make sure that this is lined up. If you hold down spacebar, you can move the marquee around without letting go. So I'm going to draw a marquee here, and then I'm also, since I'm doing all the walls at once, I'm going to hold down Shift so that I get the plus sign, and I'm going to draw another marquee. Then I have to let go so it's not a square. Draw another marquee here. So now that's going to add together. So now I have this plus sign, and so I'm completely avoiding these corners now, which is what I want. So it doesn't actually matter what order my layers are over here. So now if I draw and I can just be really crazy with it, it won't let me draw over those corners or anywhere outside of this. Of course, I'm not going to be that erratic with it, but just in case. So now I can just kind of go like this, and I'll do some like kind of weird shapes and stuff. And that's fine. And whatever I do should be okay. This might be a little weird. I don't know, I'll just delete that a little bit just so I'm not going over that line, because those are going to go up with the this section up here. Oh yeah, I can turn that thumbnail back on now. So that's fine with my red, and then I'm going to change to blue. So go back to the pencil, grab the blue color, and then I'll just draw this blue along here. And now I have to be careful. I don't want to go into the center here. You could, but yeah, because I know this tiles perfectly as it is, so if I added blue here, then I added, yeah. Let's just avoid that. So that should be fine now, and that should all tile correctly. So now I can deselect this, and now I'll delete that background. So I have the background tile here, so I can, well, I'll just use the lasso tool, so I can just kind of draw along here and go like that. And this is actually, I've selected the middle part instead of the outside part that I want. So I can invert this selection. Well, I'll just show you another little trick now. So now that I've selected the inside, I'm going to hit this mask button. And so that's going to mask off everything except for what I selected. And this is non-destructive. So that means I can get that back if I want to. I can paint over this mask, and it hasn't actually deleted anything. It's just hiding it, which is good. And so actually I'll just do that now. I'll grab the marquee and I'll put this square back because we actually want this. So then I can switch my colors to white, and then I'm filling that. You can just, if you don't know how these masks and everything work, you can just do it the simple way and just use the eraser tool or whatever. I'm just trying to show you quickly how this all, mostly just the process and the order that you should be going in. So now I'll add that back. To fill it, I'm just hitting Alt Delete or Alt Backspace to fill it with a color, which in this case is white, which is what we want on the mask to bring it back. Anyway, so I'll save this. It's always a good idea to save often. So I also have a hotkey set up. So I'm going to export this with my hotkey, and now here it is. It's just exported for me. If you don't have that, you can save as, you can save for web. You want to save this as a ping file. This is off the screen, but it's a ping 24. Make sure transparency is checked. So then you can just save that. And so I have it over here. So I'm going to just replace the one that I have already. Go in here, and you won't see it. Usually you don't see it right away. This is not straight. You don't see it right away, so I'm just going to hit my database, going to hit OK, and there, now it refreshed, and there's my new tile, and make sure I'm on the map, and I've got the rectangle, so now I can draw this out, and as you can see, this looks fine. It's a really weird tile, I know, but that works. It's all pretty much, it might look a little weird, especially just because I was using the pencil tool. And then one thing you'll notice, of course, is that we have not done those like elbow joints or whatever you want to call them. But this is actually what I think is one of the fastest ways of doing that part, is to just then draw, do this, export it, take it into RPG Maker. As you could see, like how quickly I was able to do that. So we're going to do that and then draw just a plus sign. So I have that center and I have my the different pieces here. And then I'm going to go to the Snipping Tool and hit New, and then I'm going to select that. So now I have this that I could save. I'm just going to hit the copy button. The Snipping Tool is part of Windows 7. Otherwise, you can just take a screenshot and then paste it into Photoshop. But this way I can just get this small amount, hit copy, go back to Photoshop, and now I'm just going to click on my top layer so I can put this up here. So now I'm going to paste this in, and now I have this. And so the reason I did that was so that I have these guidelines, Otherwise, I would have to build those, I'd have to cut these out and make sure that the correct lines are lining up. And so taking it in our RPG Maker actually just did it for me. So I think that's a lot quicker, actually. And then now I'm going to draw over it. And so now I want to take this, and so you see I've got this nice square that I can line up with my grid. So it doesn't really matter where I line this up, like where on the grid. I don't, because I'm gonna get rid of this. It's just temporary, so I can draw over it. So now I have this. I'll just name this plus. I'm gonna get rid of it later, and I'll make a new layer. Call this elbow joints, whatever. And now I'm going to grab my pencil again, and now I'm just gonna line this up. And now what I didn't do was draw a marquee around this again, because I want to make sure that I have these hard edges on here. So yeah, let's do that. And now this also I can do kind of a crazy design if I want, whatever. So we just want to make sure that this all is lining up. I'm going to grab the red color, draw this down. Because of the thickness and the order that I did this in, it might look a little weird in some spots, but whatever. So now that should just be that one square just by itself. So now I'm going to move that up here, and I'm going to zoom in and make sure that this is lined up properly. And now I have to erase those because remember, if we look at the diagram, these green spots, this whole square is just put right there, just in this in the same order it's in, put right there when you draw a plus sign. So that's why that worked. And then of course they're cut up like this. But luckily, as long as you have this lined up the way that I did it and have those matching, that's all it's ever going to tile with. No matter like what you do, like if you look at this one, it's always going to be bumped up against the same exact piece. So we don't it might look confusing, like especially on this one down here, like, oh, this is like touching all these different parts, but you actually don't have to worry about that. Like it should all work out if you just do it like this. And because I'm using the transparency and stuff, I want to make sure that this part is cut out. So I want to cut out this background tile here. So I can do the same thing. So again, if you don't know how to do masks, you can just use the eraser and just erase that part manually. I'm gonna just grab this and cut these out. That wasn't okay. And wrong color. Okay. So there we go. So now that's cut out. And that basically should be it. So I'm going to save this again. I'm going to export it again with my hotkey. So here it is. Overwrite it again. Back into RPG Maker. As you can see, it is not refreshed, but I'll hit the database, hit OK, and there we go. And so now you can see those are filled in, and whatever weird shapes I make, it should all work out. And then I can make one of those weird zigzags. So as you can see, like I didn't even have to think about any of that stuff. I just had to do those, follow those steps, make sure it all looked okay as I was doing it, and everything else works out. Any shape I make should look fine, despite this being a really weird auto tile. And so there you go. Now, like I said, I'm going to show you some more advanced techniques that I think are a little bit better in Photoshop, and kind of speeds things up, and also, or at least makes it, well, yeah, it speeds it up if you're making a lot, and also just gives you more control over it. If you make a mistake, you can undo things and stuff like that. So how I would normally do it is I actually have like this template that I just quickly made. I'll just duplicate that and bring it up here. I'm also going to group that one that we just made, just to get it out of the way a little bit. So I just have these sides. I'm not sure where this is. Oh, it's over here. So I don't know if you can see that marquee, but so that's the plus sign. And then I also just have this rectangle, which is the full thing. So normally what I would do, let's say I want to use some pattern here. Let's just take whatever. There's that weird cloud one I made. So I'll just take these green ones here. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to make this a pattern. And so I don't care about naming it, but so I have that set as a pattern now. And I don't know where this rectangle is actually. Oh, it's over here. Okay. So I'm going to move this over here. This has an old crappy pattern that I made. Yeah, and that's lined up. And now I'm going to change the pattern overlay on this to that new one. And because it's all, this is, you know, the correct size and everything, it'll tile it perfectly for us. And so as you saw, like I only made a pattern of one single square, and now it just tiled it all the way for us. So we don't have to like keep pasting it in 6 times, which you can do. This is just quicker and easier if you want to change this out. Like maybe you do like the rounded corners on it, and then you can just duplicate this whole thing and just change out the pattern under it, and it'll still look pretty much okay. So if you're doing kind of similar ones, that'll also save you time. And so now, so I'm using, I'm using this pencil tool, which looks crappy. What you might want to do is make a bigger, whatever. Like say this is double the size of what tile you're actually doing, because actually here, let me go back here. And if you look at some of the RTP tiles, like you can see that this is not just the pencil. Like there's a lot of variation of color in here, and it's actually sort of anti-aliased and blended. And so you could either try to draw that using like multiple colors, or you can just start bigger, start at double the size, for instance, and then just like whatever shape you're drawing, pretend this is some beautiful pattern I've just drawn. So that's blocky. You can see, all those hard edges on those pixels. I can turn off the grid. But then if we, finish our whole auto tile, like so say you make pretty much the whole auto tile. I know that if you export it into RPG Maker to get the elbow joints, that's not really going to work. But aside from that, if you draw like the main pattern this way and then do, so we'll do like cut it in half now. Now, if you look at it and we zoom in, now it has some nice anti-aliasing on it. And so now it might look pretty good. Like it'll still look fairly crisp, but it won't have any of those hard edges on it. So you might want to do that where you actually draw bigger first. And so where was I? So I'll still just use the pencil tool just because it's quicker to show you. So let's just say we're doing that, and then I'm duplicating it and cutting this up. I turned off my, oops. Actually, the grid is just pretty hard to see on this one because it's sometimes it does not want me to, okay. So now, okay, so here's, oh, okay, well I didn't duplicate the thumbnail, oops. Anyway, whatever. So with the sides template that I made, one thing you can do, and I already have this lined up, is if you hold down Control and you click on the thumbnail, it'll select it. So now I automatically have that selection that I can draw inside. But that's actually not why I do this. You could do it that way. You'll see that you can't actually see this even though it's set to white. And that is because I have the fill set to 0% opacity. And I'm going to make a new layer now, and now I'm going to use the pencil and just fill in these edges like this. And so now you can see I'm drawing way outside, but if I use a clipping mask, now it got rid of all that extra stuff, but the lines that I wanted are still there. And so that's because this layer is clipping to this template that I made for the sides, or the walls, whatever you want to call it. And so that's kind of an advanced thing. That won't work right away. So to get this to work, you have to set the fill to 0%. So if I set this back to 100, you'll see it's this big white plus sign. So set that to 0. But normally when you do that, it also hides whatever you're drawing in the clipping mask. So what you then have to do is open up the layer style on that sides, and you have to uncheck whatever, one of these. I think it's the first one. You have to uncheck, or maybe whatever, uncheck both of those, whichever one's checked. And that should let it, then you'll be able to see what you drew. So now, if I go back to this top layer that is set as a clipping mask, I don't even remember where the button for it is. I just do Control-Alt-G to set the clipping mask, whatever. Anyway, so now if I draw, you'll see that it does not let me draw outside those lines, even though you can't actually see where the lines are, like you can with the Marquee. And then if I undo that clipping mask, now you'll see all those lines that I drew. So the lines still are actually there. They're just being hidden. And so that's something that is nice to have. And then you could also, sort of do similar things. You could do something like that up here with anyway. So that's how you would do it if you're just drawing freehand. I'm going to delete all this stuff, and I'll just show you how we can make a better looking one with some of these Photoshop tools. So I'm going to draw this rounded box, and you'll notice I'm not doing the thumbnail first, just because since I'm using straight lines here, except for the rounded corners, obviously we know that these are going to match up, because it just has to tile, like this one has to tile vertically, and we're all on this vertical line. So we know that'll line up, and same thing up here. This has to tile horizontally. We know that's going to line up. So I'm going to set this to 0% fill, open up my layer style, and then I can add a stroke on there, make it a little smaller, whatever. And I could do like a bevel and emboss. And this, you could run into problems depending on how close the, because this is like faded here. It has a gradient on it. Depending on how close this rounded edge is, maybe this one wouldn't line up with this one right here. But it looks like we're okay. It looks like it's pretty consistent through here, and it doesn't start turning to white until up here. But, you might have to watch that. And so I could throw a shadow. We're kind of close to the edge there. Yeah. I mean, we've already got that shadow. Yeah, I don't really need a shadow. So I'll do that, and then again, actually, what I should be able to do is I selected this shape that I just made. Now I'm going to click on this, and that way I didn't have to select it manually, although that selection might be a little close, and because we're like right on the edge here, so this actually looks like there's some transparency here, so it didn't like line up perfectly. So you might want to extend your selection and stuff. And then I want to get these back. So there we go. And I'll save my file again, export it. Oops. Put it in here, refresh, and of course our thumbnail is not accurate, it doesn't have our thing on there, and so now you can see it's actually like kind of nice looking, just because we're using some Photoshop styles, so I didn't have to draw with the pencil tool. So that actually looks quite nice, just as it is, and that was very simple to do. Of course, now we have this plus sign that we're going to have to make, and that might be a little bit trickier, but we're going to do the same thing. Copy that, go back here, paste it, move this over. So I could kind of do the same thing where I use the same layer style and I draw the shape out here. So let me do that really quickly. So I will take this shape here, our main thing, and I'm going to duplicate that and then move that shape over. Of course, now we're underneath the layer. And then I'm going to transform this. We don't actually care about these rounded corners, but so like this could be a little bit trickier because now I have to match this stuff up, and my rounded corners are actually getting in the way a little bit. And then I'm going to use the pen tool and actually so I'm just adding points on here. We can run into a little trouble with our guides getting in the way now. I'll just pause it for a second and finish this. Okay, I just finished that. It didn't really take very long, but so I can't really take the time to explain how to use Photoshop to everybody. So feel free to look up other tutorials on Photoshop if you don't know how to do some of this stuff with the pen tool and whatever. But so now I kind of have those joints in here. I don't know for sure if they're gonna match up perfectly, but I'm just doing this quickly. So now I can I'll do that same technique I mentioned before, but I'll just kind of do it from scratch. So now if I draw out a square here, put it below this, and make that my clipping mask, but I don't want this to show up, so I'm gonna put the fill to 0, but now we can't see what we want. So now, okay, so I guess it's the second one, the blend clip layers as a group. Uncheck that, and now my lines show up, but it doesn't show anything outside of there. So that's what I want. And now, now I have to move this whole thing together, because now this is a unit now. And so that should be what we want. And now I'm going to have to erase these little corners here. So I will go back here, select these. And that's the wrong color. And there we go. So now those are gone. And we still don't have our thumbnail. You know, if I really want, I could spend the time to make like the perfect thumbnail if I wanted, or I can just do this quickly and just copy this one and just like put it up here. And then I should cut out that background. And so you'll notice that like this is just a smaller version of this big square. So the rounded corners are actually smaller corners than really like a single square would be like almost a circle, but this looks more like a square. Anyway, you'll see what I mean if you don't know what I'm talking about. So I just exported it again back here, and now magically, boom. Okay, so that doesn't match up very well right in the bottom right corner, and the top right is a little weird, and that was kind of expected. Just I did it pretty quickly, and sometimes with the shadows and things, you know, it can get weird, but you get the idea. It still looks okay. And now there's our thumbnail. So here's what I mean. Like if I just do a single square here, that's like almost a circle. It's not quite, because the rounded corners aren't right at those points, but it looks pretty much like a circle, but our thumbnail is not. So it's not exactly accurate there, but whatever. I would fix that normally. And you even could just copy it from here if you wanted to, and then just like get rid of the background. But so there are some autotiles. Let's see, I forget if there were any other little tricks I wanted to say. You know, in the first video, just in case you skipped that one or you didn't watch all the way through, I talk about the differences between all the different types of autotiles with the A1 tiles and stuff like that, and counters and all that. So if you need help with that, go check that stuff out, because there's more information there. And I just want to stress again that the order that you're doing this in is really important. And you know, after you don't want to like backtrack if at all possible. So like if I make this thumbnail, so I have my 4 corners, and I put the corners down, and then I start drawing my walls, and then I decide like, oh, actually I want this wall to be out a little bit farther. You know, that means I'll then, if I'm drawing up here onto this part, here, I'll just do it. Like if I say like, actually, yeah, let's make this wider and we'll have this come out more. Well, now that corner is not going to match up with this one. So now I'm going to have to make sure that this matches up. And then I'm also going to have to make sure that this bottom part matches up. And then I'm going to, you know, so you kind of just want to like make sure you have everything the way you want it before you go into the next step, if possible, to save you some trouble. So maybe like even after you just do the thumbnail and you move the corners out, Then you can export it and test it in the game just with a single square, just to make sure it looks right in the game, and then move on to the walls and make sure you don't touch the corners after that. But like if I did do this, if I was really sure, then I could kind of go work backwards then and copy these corners back up here, or whatever. Although it's probably better to just work on this thumbnail again and just kind of start over and extend this out and then copy those over and then do the wall, all that stuff. Now the ones that I just did are pretty simple, walkways, pathways, whatever. This one doesn't have any fences, but the fences are a little bit different to do, and I would just suggest looking at the way the fences work, just to see how they're made in the RTP, and just kind of copy that. And these ones you don't have to worry about cutting out the background for the transparency. So these are of course simpler to do, and also these have straight lines, so you don't have to worry as much about stuff not lining up. And in fact, if you don't want to do the whole like cutting out the corners thing, if you are doing straight lines like this, you can just drag a guide down and then just like make sure you're drawing across that line, because then you'll know that it'll match up and everything. So you can do it in different orders, but if you're doing just any sort of free-form thing like I was doing, then the order I showed you is a pretty safe way to go. And of course I'm leaving the artistic talent up to you. The ones or at least this freehand one looks awful because of the pencil tool. If you are using the brush, I'll just show you what I mean again. And let's say I was just drawing, so say I started out with like the thumbnail, and then I move that down or whatever. Then, now that I'm trying to match up with it, I talked about it in the last video, but for those who didn't watch it, now if I want to like draw this line, we would use the guide, of course. Then, it can be a little bit weird. That one looks like that might have been, that looks all right, but usually, I can see it here. You might not be able to see it in the video, but there is like a little bit of a difference there. You can kind of see that it's, whatever, maybe not quite lined up the same way or whatever. And so there's kind of like this edge there. So it gets a little tricky when you're using feathered brushes like this. And so that's why, like I was saying, you might want to just draw it at 200% and just use the pencil tool and then scale it down to get the feathered edges. And that might give you some much better results. I mean, you definitely don't want to be drawing with the pencil tool like this, because that looks awful. And if you look at any of these, you can see that they have a whole lot of different colors that they're using, and these lines are not just solid colors like I was doing with the pencil tool. So I guess one other thing, in the RTP on, actually might not be in, here we go, I just opened up my RTP folder. So if we look at outside A2, even though there's no transparency on this left side, see they're using the transparency for things that make sense, like the fences. Of course, you want to be able to put fences over any type of ground and bushes and things. But on this left side, they have different paths that you can do over grass, and so they just have the grass pattern behind it again. So this way you can only use this on top of grass, otherwise it won't match up. So that's a little annoying. It's much nicer. Actually, I guess I didn't even show. If I do any sorts of different things like this, that's not even going to show up very well. And then oops, I forgot. I can't grab it from there. I have to grab it back here. Okay, now if I go on here, so you can see that there is the transparency across everything. So I can use this tile because it has transparency. I can put this over anything I want and it looks good. But if I'm using, if I run out of space over here and I have to use tiles over here, so what you can do is you can just copy, copy the old one over. So I'd go here and, I'd copy this one. Oh, yeah, well, anyway, ignore that edge. Copy that out, and then I'd copy my other one out. Whoops. And let's say I want this one on top. So then I'd put this one on top here. Should probably put my guides back on. And then I could, erase, do that whole thing. And so I'll turn my guides back on. And so now I have, this one on top of that other pattern. So instead of having to cut out to show transparency, I would just be cutting it out to show this other texture behind it. And well, I can even export this one, even though this is gonna look like garbage. But now if I go here, and I did not make a thumbnail for it, but so now if I take this one and I draw it like over here, it looks terrible because there's no transparency. But if I draw it across here, then it looks, well, I didn't do the whole tile, but then it looks fine, whatever. I mean, I did not put a border around it or anything nice looking, but you get what I mean, I hope. So that, I think, is it. If you have, there might be other better techniques to use. This is just how I've been doing it, and I found this to work pretty well. But if you have other techniques, post some comments and let me know if there's a better order to do stuff in. But I hope that helps. And you can download all these files from my site. Thanks. Oh, I just remembered something else. So with this, making these elbow joint things, I keep moving this like off to the side because if I put this up here, it would be off the screen and I wouldn't be able to see it. But if you're working on a tile that's down here, you can actually just put it right over that, and then once you're done, you'll just hide it. And so that would actually, like with this one, it wasn't lined up perfectly, so I would like to fix that, but then I have to move everything back and forth every time I test it. So it actually would probably speed things up if as you're making a tile, you make it, sort of down here, and even if you're eventually going to put it, somewhere else, just for testing, you work down here, and then you can just keep hiding this and then show it again if you need to work on it more. And that will speed things up a lot if you're spending a lot of time. I assume if you're making professional quality auto tiles, you're going to be spending a lot more time than I did in this video, because I was just trying to quickly show you how it's done. And so if you make any cool tiles, I'd like to see them, and it's always nice if you share them with the community. So if I think of more things, maybe I'll make another part to this video, but I think that's it for now. Bye.